Okay, everybody, we are now going to be tackling our final CPCTC example. So, we are given some things about our triangle, and I'm trying to show that these two angles are congruent. But before I can show these two angles are congruent, I must show my triangles, these two triangles, are congruent. And then after I show the two triangles are congruent by CPCTC, my two angles will be congruent. So let's see if I can somehow show these two triangles are congruent, because I really want to show that these two angles are congruent. And I have to do it by showing the triangles are congruent. So let's see, you guys. I don't know. Let's see. Okay, so I'm given that j to the k is congruent to kn. So that's my first thing. So jk is congruent to kn. And I know because it was given to me. Yay. All right, I also know from my given that A is the midpoint of JN. So if A is the midpoint, what do we know about segment JA and AN if this is the halfway or middle point? Well, if this is the middle point, then these two pieces have to be congruent. Guys, so I know that JA is congruent to AN, and it's not because the given told me this is the midpoint, but because this is a midpoint, that means that J and AN are congruent. So the reason why I know these are congruent is because that's what it means to be a midpoint. So I'm going to call this definition of a midpoint. That's what it means to be a midpoint, that something's in the middle and creates two congruent segments. So I know that these are congruent because A is the midpoint. So yeah, there you go. All right, well, I'm out of things to use in the given, so now I need to try to use one of those tricks up my sleeves to mark something else in my picture as congruent to show the two triangles are congruent by either SSS, SAS, angle side, AAS, or ASA. So I don't know. Let's see here. I don't see any vertical angles, no X's anywhere. I don't even have angles in my picture marked as congruent, so I definitely cannot use the third angle theorem to show that the third angles are congruent. That's out of the question. But do you guys spot a shared side? Segment AK is congruent to segment AK. And how I know that is by the reflexive property. You guys are correct. Whenever we have a shared side, this is because of the reflexive property. Way to go, you guys. You guys are so smart. Like, I don't even know why I teach you. You guys should be teaching me. But anyway, so now I do have three things in each triangle marked as congruent. So how are these two triangles marked in as congruent? It is by the side theorem. I got a side. Bam. And then I got a side. So these two triangles are congruent by SSS. So I'm going to say triangle. I'm going to name the top one however I feel like. I'm going to name it KJA. Oh, KJA is congruent to triangle. Now KJA, if I follow the way I trace my triangle, I go from 1 tick mark to 2 tick marks to 3. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so if I want to name this bottom triangle going from 1 tick mark to 2 to 3, well, that would be KNA. I go from 1 to 2 to 3, so KNA. Also goes 1, 2, 3. Yay! And they are congruent by SSS. Okay, so now that I know that these two triangles are congruent, all I used to show that they were congruent are by marking the sides to be congruent. But now that I know the triangles are congruent, okay, that means everything's congruent. All my sides and all three angles are congruent. So technically KAJ and KAN I now know are congruent because my triangles are congruent. So since corresponding parts of congruent triangles have to be congruent, that means I know these two angles are congruent by CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Technically, I could also say angle J and N are now congruent because I know my two triangles are congruent. That would also be because of CPCTC. I could also say angle JKA and angle AKN, these two, are congruent as well because I know that my triangles are congruent. So all my angles are congruent. So that would also be because of CPCTC. So we use CPCTC after triangles are congruent to show that the remaining sides and angles that were not originally marked congruent are now congruent. Pretty cool, right, you guys? Well, that was awesome, and I'm so excited. I'm going to do a happy face. So way to go, you guys. CPCTC is donezo.